Welcome to Crimson Clues, where shadows hide secrets and silence reveals the truth. Every story is a puzzle, and every clue takes you closer to the answer. Subscribe now, join the hunt, and let the mystery begin. Chapter 1. An Odd Omission. I found myself in the sleepy, snow-covered village of Burrell Hollow in December 1937, as the season was coming to an especially painful end. A rather impromptu invitation to spend Christmas at the rural estate of Admiral Horace Dalrymple, a retired naval man of some fame and, as Pooh O'Reilly noted, a master of punctual lunch-on engagements, if not of nuanced discussion, had brought me along with my old friend Hercule Poirot. Bracker Hollow resembled a picture-perfect village. There were little streets that wound between snow-covered cottages, a stone church with a solemn little bell, and people from the town who, depending on the direction of the wind, nodded either warmly or suspiciously. I got the impression that nothing more exciting than a pig on the loose ever happened there. It appeared to be a tranquil retreat, but even a quiet community has secrets. During those initial days, I noticed a certain kind of guardedness among the residents. Nice smiles, indeed, but too prepared, too honed, as though they were intended to hide rather than to show. Of course Poirot saw it too. I saw him often observing the interactions amongst the people with the expression of a guy silently tallying, but he never spoke directly. The Admiral's house was as hospitably warm as his demeanor when we arrived on December 23rd. Poirot was obviously having fun. Despite being retired, as he frequently reminded me, the brilliant investigator embraced the fireplace at the Admiral like a cat to cream, enjoying the warmth and the friendly banter. I must admit that the thought of a peaceful Christmas, devoid of mystery or risk, appealed to me as well. Admiral Dalrymple lived in a respectable, square, ancient Georgian home with a view of the river and well-placed drafts. The chef, a scary woman called Mrs. Bell, produced hearty meals that kept the cold at away, and the drawing room always smelled vaguely of pipe tobacco and wood smoke. Poirot and our host talked about naval logistics for many delightful hours, even though he informed me that he thought the Admiral's mustache was terrible. A tiny tremor of uneasiness started to shake the snow-covered peace on the morning of the Mar 25th when the local church bells rang out for the Christmas service. Mr. Thomas Cleeve, the postman, hadn't gone around. "It's not like him at all," said Mrs. Dalrymple, a substantial woman wearing a huge robin-shaped brooch. "No matter the weather, rain, snow, or illness, he has never missed a Christmas delivery. He is constantly present, stumbling around with his bundle of cards and packages." Our breakfast table was decked out with holly and the subtle scent of cinnamon buns. Halfway to his lips, Poirot stopped his spoon. "Mondure," he murmured quietly, "the postman from England. N'est-ce pas? His dependability is famous. It is a very odd thing for him to vanish." I speculated that he might have twisted his ankle in the snow or overslept. The Admiral shook his head. "Tom Cleeve is the type of person who would deliver the king's post when ill and on crutches. Believe me, there's a problem." Word swiftly spread around the village by mid-morning. There was a lot of gossip going on in the small tea shop, and old Miss Wetherb, who owned the general store, was overheard saying that it was the first indication that the end was near. It appeared like everyone had a hypothesis, and none of them were consoling. Mr. Cleeve's absence became increasingly noticeable as the St. Edmund's church service came to an end and the villagers crowded about the lich gate with whispered rumors. His post-bag was discovered partially buried in a hedge near the old mill path. According to information supplied by a small girl named Polly, Poirot squinted his eyes in curiosity. A post-bag left on Christmas Eve in a thicket. "You saw the importance, Hastings." "Indeed, I couldn't say I did." "It was dropped by the man." Poirot let out a sigh. "No, mon ami. Post-bags are not dropped in hedges. It could end up in one's own corridor, on a bench or on a doorstep. However, A hedge implies haste or purposeful concealment, perhaps both. Soon after, at the great request of Mrs. Dalrymple, Constable Harling was called to the Admiral's. Harling was a tall, somewhat anxious young man who appeared to be unfamiliar with responsibility and unsure of how to handle it. As he spoke, he grasped his hat in both hands. It's likely he took a tumble somewhere and lying hurt. Harling came to the weakly believable conclusion. Perhaps they slipped off the route along the river. A handful of guys are out gazing at me. Pugh's eyebrows went up. So why don't you leave the bicycle behind but the bag? The reasoning doesn't make sense, nor does me see. The bicycle is nowhere to be found, Harling said, blushing. Could be someone pinched it, or you walked off to find aid and left the bag to reduce the load. Poirot remained silent, but there was a noticeable tightening of the corners of his mouth. Poirot decided he had to look into it more by the time we went back to the Admiral's for lunch. Mrs. Dalrymple made every effort to bring back the spirit of Christmas. They gave out paper crowns and produced a large dessert with burning brandy, but to no avail. Beyond the glow of the candle, a shadow of uneasiness had taken root. Instead of settling down to plum pudding and cherries on Christmas afternoon, we trudged into the icy fields of Birknall Hollow to find a missing postman and a fact that, although unknown to us at the time, was buried deeper than any snowdrift: the bag in the hedge. Chapter 2. The hedge in question ran along the border of Old Mill Lane, a rutted, narrow road that led from the village's southern edge toward a group of abandoned structures where water wheels used to revolve in the past. The old mill stood as a ruin, its stone walls moss-grown and bending with the wear and tear of years, and the path was now filled with brambles. The post bag was partially concealed by a snowdrift, slightly off the path. She fetched her father, after a toddler who was playing with a wooden sled tripped across the dark canvas and poked through the white. The vicar had received the news directly from the individual and promptly forwarded it to the constable. Pooh carefully knelt next to the sack. Instead of touching it all at once, he studied it from a variety of perspectives with the thoughtful respect of an art critic. He murmured, "You observe, Hastings, no one has dragged the sack. No furrow in the snow, no scrape marks. This is where it was put." I crouched next to him. Is it possible that it fell off the bike? What a great question. However, you will notice that this is the heel print, an indentation in the snow. It is unaltered and crisp. Someone walked back the way they came after standing here and dropping off the bag. I took a closer look. Indeed, in the cover of the hedge, faint footsteps could be seen in the crusted snow. Behind us, Harling cleared his throat. "I'll ask the boys to mark off the area. Even if there isn't much traffic down here," Poirot whispered. "Treba." Slowly, he opened the post bag. A piece of cream stationery was folded between two envelopes, along with a number of small wrapped packages and a variety of letters, some with the glue already curled and others sealed with wax. He extended it so I could see it. There were only 5 words scribbled in a rushed hand. "He is aware that we are done." My brows went up. "Lord." Poirot remained silent for a while. Then he folded the note and slipped it back among the letters. "Maybe," he suggested, "it's just a lover's argument. Or maybe it's the secret to everything." Soon after Poirot, we departed, the location in silence and contemplation. He abruptly stopped and looked toward the fields as we were heading back down the lane. "What is that building?" he asked. "The tiled one that's red?" Harling said that's the inn. Thistle and the Rose. It is currently run by old Mr. Gray, but his daughter is largely responsible for its survival. Millie was a lively young girl. Poirot wrote something down in his small leather notepad. "Then maybe," he continued quietly, "we'll have lunch there tomorrow and talk to the vivacious Miss Gray." The atmosphere had changed even more back at the Admiral's. The Admiral was strangely silent as he poured himself a substantial glass of port, while Mrs. Dalrymple fussed over the curtains in the drawing room. changing them for the third time in that hour. He mumbled, I knew something was wrong. Polly, who was usually talkative, was as silent as a naval tribunal this morning when I first saw that girl's face at church. I sipped tea by the fire with Poirot. Outside, the snow was falling slowly, shrouding the settlement in a spooky silence. At one time, Poirot got up and walked over to the window. He watched the white flakes drift against the darker sky for a moment, his arms folded behind his back. Then he turned abruptly. Hastings, let us walk. Once again, we wrapped ourselves in scarves and coats and walked through the rear gardens and along the narrow paths that led behind the homes. It was dusk now, and the windows gleamed with candlelight and flickering hearths. The serene setting just intensified the discussion in my head. We stopped at the Vicarage Gardens gate. Poirot gave the edifice a curious glance. What do we know about this Mr. Cleve Hastings? Not much, I said. He was regarded as trustworthy, amiable, and on time. He wasn't the type of man to disappear. No, Poirot concurred. However, as you will see, my friend, men like that, men who don't draw attention to themselves, can be extremely dangerous to the wrong kind of person, a man who sees everything and doesn't speak until it's too late. He faced the admirals once more. Tomorrow we will talk to Miss Grey. Tonight, however, we need to think about who in this hamlet was afraid of being discovered. He looked at me gravely. And Thomas Cleve was feared by whom? Later that night, Poirot spread out the contents of the post-bag on a tiny table as the grandfather clock ticked solemnly in the corner and the fire popped and cracked. He went through each packet one by one, taking note of the stamps, return addresses, and handwriting. Among them were circulars, a bunch of bills, Christmas cards, and invitations. Carefully, he set it aside. This is a thread. Attention, mon ami. Yes, we need to be firm, yet gentle. The entire tapestry might come undone if we pull too hard. He steepled his fingers again and sat back in his chair. This time, he said, there is something rotten in Bowl Hollow, but with more sensitivity. And I'm afraid it's more than just one man who's gone. Chapter 3. Silent Faces and Hushed Speech. The next morning dawned beneath an iron sky, and Brerecknell Hollow was covered in long, thin shadows from a pale sun. The rhythms of the village had returned. Boots on packed snow, chimney smoke, yet a silence that hung like a sigh held too long. When I descended, Poirot was already clothed and stood next to the Admiral's writing desk, looking at a little map of the village that he had clearly taken out of a drawer. He said, "Good morning, Hastings," without raising his gaze. Today we stroll to watch rather than to engage in chatter. You know, there's a difference. According to my observations, the former frequently results in the latter. Poirot let himself a little smile, but truth comes from only one. He carefully folded the map. This disappearance is not coincidental. It functions and has symmetry, much like a Swiss watch's mechanism. So let's look at the gears. And where do we start? Mon ami, who, not where. As we had left it, the vicarage seemed tidy, solemn, and a little nervous. We were met at the entrance by the Reverend Samuel Phipps, who was still wearing his cassock and had a wool scarf around his neck. "I assume you are not here to discuss the nativity tableau," he remarked, smiling wearily as he invited us inside. "No, Mauvaquer," Poirot answered. "Mr. Cleve is the reason we are here." "You were acquainted with him?" "Yes," Phipps answered cautiously. "I knew his habits. He consistently brought my letters at 11:40 on Tuesdays and Fridays. But there has been a hesitancy lately. He was lingering now. He inquired about a Captain Elmore, whose name is listed on the War Memorial, and other topics. Primarily historical." Pooh cocked his head. "And what of this Captain Elmore?" Phipps's fingers were steepled. "Young and distinguished, they perished in the Great War. Long after he was buried in secrecy, there emerged a scandal that suggested he had not passed away as honorably as was said. Although foul play was suspected, Mr. Cleeve discovered it after. Time passed as it always does. The vicar scowled. He thought the postal service had been abused at that time by someone in the village. That a fake letter had come too conveniently or too late. He referred to it as a historical hinge. I didn't fully follow him. Poirot's eyes shone brightly, yet the attention might have gone unnoticed by others. Phipps's fingers were white against the teacup, but he remained silent. We then called on Edith Cleeve, a tall, slender woman whose home exuded the atmosphere of someone who had practiced resignation while waiting for bad news. Her gaze swept across Poirot's face as if gauging the significance of his mission. Without introducing herself, she stated, "My brother is dead." She was not contradicted by Poirot. He was never reckless, she added. The bag was taken away from him if it was discovered abandoned. Would you mind telling me, madam, if he had any odd letters? She looked across at the chilly fireplace. He had apparently received a hand-delivered letter without a stamp. After reading it, he slipped it into a copy of the Times and became as white as snow. For the remainder of the evening, he remained silent. You have the letter. She pulled the folded newspaper out of a drawer. With reverence, Poirot received it. There was one unsigned page within. Once you brought it. You're not going to bring it again. Then let it die as it ought to have. Poirot's face became stern. Ah, a message with teeth below its nostalgic exterior. Edith nodded. Before he left the house the following morning, he informed me that some stories are left unfinished since the last page was torn out. The note was slipped into Poirot's coat. We will try to get it back. When we got there, the rose and thistle was more subdued than normal. A single fire blazed, while behind the counter Millie Gray polished glasses with a determination that implied avoidance. Before either of us could say anything, she said, "You're here about Tom." I told the constable I didn't see anything. But Poirot replied softly, "Mademoiselle, the constable is not me. I'm a small guy who really enjoys the truth." After looking around, she leaned in a little. He already knew the answers to the questions Tom posed. He was gently pressing folks as a test, the sort of pressure that causes cracks to show. I said, "What kind of cracks?" Millie spoke softly. "A story exists. A letter from the front was delayed throughout the war. This is a death notification intended for a young lady. The army said that her fiancé had been killed in France. However, she didn't receive the letter in time. She had consented to wed a local man by that point. When the truth caught up, it shattered 3 lives. Quietly, of course. The calm ruin is a specialty of this settlement." Poirot thought about it. "And you think the original letter was found again by Thomas Cleeve?" "I'm not sure, but he once told me that he thought certain regrets take decades too. Locate the correct address, exhibiting time-traveling guilt." She grabbed another glass. "Miss Poirot, he discovered someone's remorse, and they made sure it wouldn't be delivered." The last of the afternoon light was fading behind the hills when we walked again into the bitter cold. The windows of Brackerol hollow gleamed with the false warmth of unbroken lives, while snowflakes floated languidly in the air. Poirot's breath fell in tiny clouds as he strolled in quiet. I had learned to identify this stillness as a precise sorting of mental files rather than hesitation. Finally, he said something. "Hastings, we've seen 3 portraits today, all of which were created with quite delicate brushstrokes. Millie, Phipps, and Edith Cleeve. All 3 of us who were impacted by Monsieur Thomas Cleeve talk about old secrets, war secrets, postal errors, and communications that were withheld." He paused under the ancient oak tree that delineated the churchyard's perimeter. The branches, bare and black, clawed upward like inquiries in the dusk. "Consider, mon ami, what does a postman handle?" "Parcels, letters," I said. "Not at all. He handles trust. His absence hurts this village more than murder does because of this. They put their intimate selves and their words in his hands." He peered in the direction of the village's distant end. A cottage window flickered a weak light. "There's another one who knew that," he whispered. "Someone who witnessed what Thomas witnessed many years ago. A calm and well-respected man who assisted in overseeing the post-war memorial fund." I scowled. "Who?" Poirot's gaze grew strained. "The village solicitor, Mr. Albert Hitchens." I blinked. "He hasn't been mentioned at all." "Exactly. His silence is a roar in a village full of murmurs." He made a firm turn. "We meet a man who has dedicated his life to keeping secrets tomorrow, Hastings. One of them, however, has now exploded its envelope." Chapter 4. The letter was never sent. Overnight, the snow had gotten deeper. Under its heavy white blanket, the Bracker Hollow looked like a partially erased painting. But Poirot asserted that beneath that calm was a heartbeat that was erratic, stuttering, and perilously near to ceasing. We left just after 9 o'clock. Poirot appeared to be impervious to the cold, despite the frigid morning, with his mustache as calm as usual, his gait swift, and his coat pristine. We arrived to a little home on the outskirts of the community, tucked up behind a short stone wall and a frost-covered privacy hedge. On the gate, there was a plaque that said, "A Hitchens, solicitor, by appointment." Of course, Poirot had no appointment. A slim, formal, late middle-aged guy, with features pulled into lines of placid control, opened the door. He was without a jacket, wearing a throwaway coat, and his glasses were halfway down his nose. "Yes," he said, politely. Poirot said, "Mr. Hitchens," and held out a card. "My name is Hercule Poirot. You might have known Mr. Thomas Cleeve, I think." A pause occurred. The man's eyes tightened slightly at the corner. "I just knew the postman in the sense that one knows such people. You could say that they are professional neighbors." "What's going on here?" Poirot gave a soft smile. "Monsieur, I think Thomas Cleeve had recently been interested in something you once assisted in burying." Hitchens looked at him silently. Without saying a word, he moved aside. The office was tidy, compact, and had a subtle scent of lavender oil and dust. One wall was lined with shelves of heavy-bound ledgers. On a hob, a kettle sat forgotten. Poirot looked around. "You are a man of discretion, a man who does not traffic in drama." Hitchens answered, "I'm a solicitor, with just a hint of cynicism. Not a novelist." Then you realize how dangerous a long-suppressed narrative can be. One was being discovered by Monsieur Cleeve. Hitchens folded his hands and sat down. "Mr. Poirot, are you accusing me of something?" "No," replied Poirot gently. "I'm giving you a chance to clarify before someone else does it in a less polite manner." A protracted hush ensued. At last, Hitchens took off his glasses and carefully cleaned them. "Very well," he muttered. "Yes, 3 weeks earlier, Thomas Cleeve had come up to me." A familiar sense of anticipation stirred within me. Poirot stood motionless, staring at the solicitor's face with his emerald eyes. "He brought a letter here," Hitchens added. I had hoped I would never see this extremely old letter again. Poirot responded that was not a question, quoting Captain James Elmore. Hitchens gave a slow nod. "Written on October 3, 1917, from a field hospital in France. Within a week, it ought to have gotten to Miss Dorothy Ashworth. Instead," he stared at his hands as he drifted off. Rather, Poirot softly prodded. "It never came." "I misplaced the letter," Hitchens muttered. Dorothy had gotten the formal notice of her death by that point. She wore black for a year and grieved him appropriately. Then, gradually she started to agree to Harold Pembridge's advances. Leaning forward, I started to realize how horrible it was. But Captain Elmore wasn't dead. Hitchens said, "Shell shock," in a barely audible voice. For months, he lost his memories. After he recovered, he wrote to Dorothy to let her know that he had survived, what had happened to him, and that he hoped to see her again. But that letter... He waved blankly. Poirot never reached her, concluded. Because she thought her first love was dead, she married Harold Pembridge. Hitchens said that the wedding took place in June 1918. In August of that year, James went back to England. Is it possible? He expected to see his distraught fiancée waiting for him when he arrived at Bracker Hollow. With the exception of the mantel clock's ticking, the room became quiet. Just picturing the scene made me sick. What happened when he arrived? I asked. It was hardly more than a whisper when Hitchens spoke. It was up to me to tell him. By that time, Dorothy was Mrs. Pembridge, 3 months into her marriage and expecting her first child. James sobbed uncontrollably and admitted that he recognized that she had every right to start over if she had been informed of his passing. However, Poirot noted that he was unaware of the letter. Never. He thought Dorothy had just received the death notice and responded appropriately, and that the Army's notification system had malfunctioned. He was too much of a gentleman to hold it against her for being happy with someone else. So what became of him? I asked. For several weeks, he stayed at the Rose and Thistle while he considered his options. Do you realize that he was weak? He was severely harmed by the fighting. He ultimately made the decision to leave England completely, claimed that nothing remained for him in this place. Poirot leaned forward, but didn't he go away? Hitchens's eyes snapped up. What are you saying? Sir, come. You're telling the story of a man who finds out his beloved has gotten married to someone else and has nothing left to live for. These men don't just reserve a flight to Australia. The solicitors' hands began to shake a little. James, 3 days prior to his scheduled departure, James committed suicide. They located him at the former mill where he and Dorothy had first met while courting. This was also concealed. Scandal was not necessary. The coroner showed compassion. It was noted as an accident. A battle hero who had already had enough of slipping on the river's damp stones. It was accepted in the village. Dorothy never knew the truth. Until Thomas Cleeve discovered the undeliverable letter, Poirot sat back with his fingers tangled. Tom understood instantly what it meant. According to Hitchens, James passed away with the belief that Dorothy had chosen another man over him, that she was unaware that he had returned for her and that he had survived. And how did Muscle Cleave suggest using this information? He wanted to let her know that she deserved to know that James loved her enough to return, and that her premature remarriage was not the reason for his death. A little of Hitchens's voice cracked. Tom thought she might find comfort in the truth. I stated, but you didn't agree. Captain Hastings, Dorothy is 41 years of age. Her spouse, Harold, is ill. Although her kids are almost grown, they only know James Elmore from his name on the war memorial. How could she find peace knowing that she had unintentionally contributed to the suicide of her first love almost 2 decades ago? Poirot got to his feet and went to the window. So you sent him that frightening message. I pleaded with him to change his mind. He did not see reason, despite my hope that he would. No. Tom felt some realities were too vital to suppress, no matter how unpleasant. On Christmas Eve morning, he would personally deliver the letter to Dorothy, which is why he was stopped. Poirot muttered. Hitchens' eyes were fixed on his hands. Mr. Poole, I promise you that I didn't hurt Thomas Cleeve. However, you're correct. Someone did. Someone who was aware of the contents of the letter and couldn't stand for Dorothy to find out. Poirot thought someone who was there when Captain Elmore came back. Someone who knows the exact circumstances of his demise. Hitchens muttered, yes. And the number of people who still remember those times is really small. From the window, Poirot turned. Who else was aware that Captain Elmore had committed suicide? The vicar conducted the funeral service, and the doctor inspected the body. Harold Pembridge himself. James was discovered near the mill by him. My blood froze. The body was discovered by Harold Pembridge. He had set out to find him. Apparently, they hoped to somehow make peace. Rather, he discovered James in the mill pond, floating face down. Harold also kept his wife in the dark. His wife, Dorothy, was the mother of his child. Rather than live without her, why ruin her pleasure knowing that her first love had committed suicide? Poirot was quiet for a while. Finally he said, "Unless, Missy Hitchens, it was not suicide at all." The lawyer turned pale. "What do you propose?" "I am arguing," Poirot responded, "that a man who had gained his bride only by the happenstance of a mislaid letter would have found Captain Elmore's return. Not convenient. You can't say Harold wouldn't, can you?" Poirot's tone had become piercing. Only a few months after their wedding, his wife's first love comes back to life. If Dorothy had knew James was still alive, what do you think she would have done? Hitchens remained silent, but that was sufficient. Now 20 years later, Thomas Cleeve threatens to not only expose the misplaced letter, but also to raise suspicions over Captain Elmore's hasty demise. Poirot added, "Inquiries that could result in a completely different understanding of what transpired at the mill that evening." Weakly, Hitchens protested, "Harold is dying. Consumption. At most, he has a few months to live." With a growing awareness, I said, "All the more reason to ensure his reputation dies with him, unmarked by scandal." Poirot gave a somber nod. "Mon ami, a dying man has everything to preserve and little to lose." "Where is the letter now?" I inquired as we were getting ready to depart. James's letter to Dorothy. Hitchens gave a headshake. "When Tom went, he took it with him. Claimed that he needed time to choose the best way to distribute it." When I said, "Then it died with him," "Perhaps," said Poirot. "Or maybe it hasn't arrived at its destination yet." The snow kept falling outside, and I found myself staring at the quiet village with a new and frightened sense of comprehension. As we made our way to the Admiral's residence, I murmured, "Poirot, we are dealing with a man who has lived with murder for 20 years. Poirot concluded, and who will not think twice about killing again to keep his secret safe. If Harold Pembridge killed both James Elmore and Thomas Cleeve. He stopped and turned to face the village, where smoke billowed from each chimney in a serene manner. However, Hastings, his time runs out, and desperate men make deadly errors. Chapter 5. The Binding Bonds. We came out of the office of Mr. Hitchen. The disclosures made by the solicitor were weighing heavily on us. In addition to the lost letter and the old tale of Captain Elmore, I was also troubled by the terrible feeling that the current mystery was eluding us. Once more, the snow was getting deeper, creating a deafening silence in the winding paths of Bracknell Hollow. With his head slightly bent and his coat buttoned tight, Poirot walked silently next to me. The only thing that showed the fevered labor of his tiny gray cells was the gleam in his eyes. I made an effort to gather my own thoughts. I started to wonder if Harold Pembridge had lied about Captain Elmore. And he is undoubtedly our man if he is now desperate to hide Cleeve's revelation. Pooh let out a sigh. "Not at all, buddy. We shouldn't jump to hasty conclusions. Always use evidence rather than feelings." He stopped, gazing out over a now white, intact churchyard. "But you also feel it, don't you? This enterprise runs more deeply than a dying man's shame." A voice cried out to us from behind at that very moment. Constable Harling was there, his cap flurrying with snow. "I have something you'll want to see." "Mr. Poirot." The hedge drew in close and dark as he guided us along the side of the ancient mill lane. Here, a battered bicycle was partially buried beneath the low limbs of a twisted hazel. The chain clotted with ice and the paint was scuffed. Just before the final squall, a farm kid discovered Harling, who gestured. According to all accounts, Tom leaves. With his brilliant eyes, Poirot squatted and brushed the snowflakes from the frame. "The bicycle is located close to the location of the post bag, you see, Hastings. In snow, a guy cannot carry both. Was urgency or chase involved or deliberate concealment?" A tremulous yell erupted from the adjoining footbridge before I could reply. "Something's in the water here." We ran to the other side of the pond. There was a huddle of locals looking at each other anxiously. Poirot pressed forward. Anticipating the worst, I followed. The distinct form of a guy laying face down in the shallows was there, tangled at the reeds and rimed with ice. The local doctor, Dr. Halberd, leaned to see the body as the constable motioned to leave. After a minute, his look revealed our fears. Poirot narrowed his eyes and knelt by the bank. "No mishap," he whispered. "Look at the marks on the wrist and the muck on the coat." He struggled into the water after being pulled. Silly murmurs fell among the folks. The inn received a somber nod from old Mrs. Wetherbe. She whispered, "Who would wish harm to Tom Cleeve?" Confident that I knew the answer, I looked at Poirot. Poirot stood abruptly, agitated, as if Pembridge was afraid the tale of Captain Elmore might be revealed. When the facts are not yet gathered in the correct sequence, we will not make accusations. Hastings is another factor at work. I have no doubt that someone else witnessed these events. He turned abruptly. "There is an unheard witness to the rose and thistle." Fear and the smell of stewed onions filled the air within the inn. Millie Gay was standing behind the bar, wiping her hands on her apron, silent and pale. Poirot walked slowly toward him. "Pardon me, mademoiselle. You watched Tom Cleeve on Christmas Eve, did you not?" She glanced at the door and then back at us. "Tom was there, indeed. He was uneasy, but he came to speak. He claimed to have something that would make all the difference." Her hands shook. "The only thing he would say was that he had to see Mrs. Pembridge that day." Poirot gave a nod. "When he went, did anyone pursue him?" Millie hesitated, lips pressed thin. "I am unable to say with certainty. Shortly after, I believed I saw Harold Pembridge walking in the opposite direction, dressed up against the cold." Her voice trailed off. "However, shortly before, I also noticed Mr. Hitchens departing the inn. He sometimes swings by for a bit of tea before anyone else is about." My heart jumped. Hitchens. Poirot, however, thanked Millie with a head bow and held her a finger for silence. Outside, the breeze pricked our cheeks with resentment. Poirot dragged me out of the worst of the storm and into a small side street. "Is that right, Hastings? The waters are mudded, yes, but there is a current beneath. Hitchens and Pembridge were both aware of the letter, and they might have an incentive to keep the peace at any costs." As we trekked through the snow in the direction of the Pembridge house, my mind was racing with uncertainties and anxieties. We discovered Dorothy Pembridge inside, tending to a fire, her posture tight with concern and her face drawn. Despite the situation, she greeted us with a poise that I thought was almost superhuman. After expressing sympathy, Poirot subtly got down to business. "You knew Tom Cleeve well, madame?" She gave a nod. "For almost 20 years, he has been our postman. Always on time, always courteous." "Did he knock on your door yesterday?" Her face was shadowed. "No, I had him in mind. He had said he would bring something significant. He never showed up." There was a slight knock at the door. Harold Pembridge, who appeared older and more fragile than any man I had ever seen, shuffled into the room. His gaze shifted among the three of us. Poirot bowed his head. "Your movements yesterday, Moo Pembridge. Could we bother you?" Harold croaked his voice. "I made it as far as the Thistle and Rose. Tom was reportedly looking for Dorothy. I spoke with him, but I never meant to hurt you, Poirot, I promise you." He sank into a chair as he started to cough, a deep, rasping fit. Dorothy's knitting fingers became tense. After a moment of stillness, Poirot quickly straightened his handcuffs. "Monsieur Mercy, when the policeman has finished his work at the pond, we will return." Poirot pulled me in as we went outdoors again, the sun beginning to drop over Bracker Hollow. His tone was urgent and low. "Take a look, Hastings. Though not around the necks as most people would anticipate, the net is closing. There is a clever, meticulous person here who has power over multiple stories and multiple outcomes." With a deliberate step, he turned toward the center of the snow-covered village. "The truth will be revealed tomorrow." Nobody can stop it now. No matter how skilled they are at hiding secrets. The solicitor's heart. Chapter 6. As word spread, a restless breeze shook Bracknell Hollow. All people affected by the catastrophe had been called to the crimson drawing room of the Admiral by Poirot. In the tense suspended silence that precedes a storm, the village waited as firelight flickered over faces drawn by suspicion and sorrow. Harold Pembridge and Dorothy were there. Harold shrank in his chair, but he was determined. Pale as paper, Millie Gray's hand was intertwined with her father's. The owner of the Thistle and Rose was old Mr. Gray, with eyes as wide as centuries. At station, Admiral Dalrymple and his powerful wife sat side by side. Reverend Phipps, the vicar, lingered on the edge. Edith Cleeve stood backstiff at the window. Unsure whether to feel relief or fear, Constable Harling embraced his notebook. Albert Hitchens finally came in, his customary reserve suddenly bursting. With tense nervousness, after letting the room settle, Poirot stood at the hearth and spoke in a solemn tone that was heavy with the conclusion of untangled secrets. According to Madame Z's message, forgiveness can only come after the truth. Let's finally let the truth stand tonight. Everybody looked at him. He made a soft motion. Confronting Thomas Cleeve at the pond, Harold Pembridge has admitted to begging and even threatening, but not killing him. Millie Gray courageously acknowledges that she was powerless to stop her observation. Mrs. Cleeve, the Grays, and the vicar have all contributed pieces, but the whole picture is still shattered. There was a long pause. Poirot looked around the crowd before focusing on Hitchens. One more whose story has not yet been fully shared. Color rose in Hitchens' bristles. I've told you everything I know. Poirot broke in, his voice rising softly. No, monsieur, not all. Instead of truth, you have offered order. Instead of speaking as a guy whose life was impacted and destroyed by the ancient falsehood, you have talked as the Ville's solicitor. Gasps. Fluttered, Dorothy pushed Harold closer. Millie held on to her dad's arm. Poirot stepped forward, fire blazing in his voice. You were Dorothy Ashworth's torchbearer for 20 years. You managed her family's finances, her husband's work, and their marriage settlement. All the while, your own heart was bound by the things you had concealed and lost. You persuaded yourself it was for her serenity when you didn't deliver Captain Elmore's letter. However, Cleeve's revelation of the truth endangered not just Dorothy and Harold, but also everything you had done to maintain your value while permanently outside. Hitchens tried to stand, but Poirot's words pinned him. Mr. Hitchens, it was more than just professional pride. It was a life of agonizing, quiet need, a repressed worship that twisted inward till it became rage and despair. Since that serenity and your position within it were all that remained of you, you pleaded with Tom Cleeve not to deliver the letter or damage the tranquility. He refused to give in. So when Harold left the pond, you followed, desperate, cornered by fate. You were undone by the passion of 20 years, and the resentment of always being the tidier rather than the cherished. You attacked out of fear and rage, ultimately acting more for your own benefit than for Dorothy's. Hitchens nearly laughed and spat. Are you aware of what it's like to remain silent for 20 years, while lesser men are ruled and the life you had imagined eludes you every winter? Have you ever tidied up every secret and never claimed a single joy for yourself? There were a few gasps in the room. Even Dorothy's stare softened with comprehension. Poirot persisted. You saved Dorothy's letter, not to spare her suffering, but to maintain your own optimism and the delusion you had helped create. Tom Cleeve promised to reveal Harold's identity as well as yours when he threatened that illusion. The man who chose the icy comfort of order because he was unable to express his passion and buried the truth. With a trembling voice, Hitchens stood up. I pleaded with him. Tom refused to listen when I pleaded with him to let the past go. He babbled on about justice and mending past hurts. He had never experienced the daily pain of grieving for a past he had never experienced. Raw and untamed emotions erupted. So, I gave him a shove, indeed. I watched Harold go away defeated and broken, Cleve still clutching that blasted letter. I alone stayed. I threatened to have him damned first if he broke Dorothy's serenity, and condemned her to a life of self-loathing and remorse. He chuckled. Consequently, I shoved him into the water. I witnessed the truth drown alongside him as I pushed his face. Under the water, the voice of Hitchens broke. Not for me, never for her, always for her. Poirot's gaze stayed harsh, but his features softened. A conscience tainted, a passion denied. You became the jailer and the prisoner. Yes, monsieur. Finally. Dorothy spoke shaky. Albert, you loved me. With pain etched in his face, Hitchens closed his eyes. Even if it meant getting my hands dirty, I made sure you, Dorothy, would never know the depths of all our betrayals because I worshipped you. For a long time, the silence was a mixture of grief and anger. Then Poirot's voice was tired and low. Ultimately, desire cannot be buried any more than the truth itself, monsieur. I hope that you are at peace. However, this isn't it. With a quivering voice, Constable Harling moved forward. Now you have to accompany me, Mr. Hitchens. As the tempest eventually subsided, Poirot looked around the room, grief, compassion, and disbelief mingling as Hitchens left, shattered but oddly unburdened. He addressed the entire wounded hamlet in addition to those in front of him. May Bracken Hollow at last begin to heal by letting both see the light. Outside, the first sounds of morning birds singing floated into the silence as thawing snow flowed in the gutters. Music, Solicitor Albert Hitchens, whose unfulfilled love and hidden secrets led him to drown Thomas Cleve in order to quiet a long-lost letter, is revealed by Hercule Poirot as the murderer as the snow falls over Bracknell Hollow. Inspired by actual circumstances, the missing postman case ends with justice done, but echoes of a broken peace that linger like winter frost. Dear listeners, we hope you have been captivated by this plunge into the darkness. Was the solicitor's secret passion a surprise to you, or did the ancient ghosts of the war deceive you? Comment below. Please like and subscribe to Nocturnal Tales for more suspenseful stories if the missing postman case has captured your attention. You can join our membership link in the description or leave a tip via Super Thanks to support our craft. We appreciate you being here, and until our next story, may your days be clear and your nights full of mystery.